Chapter 33. He entered the office and closed the door behind him. Bai Shuili ran over and picked Xiaobai up. Her heart ached as she complained, "You're heartless." Secretary Gao went up and asked concernedly, "Mrs. Yi, do you want to go to the secretary's office?" "No need." Bai Shuili carried the little tortoise and went to Yi Mulin's office. She twisted the door and it opened. She told him that he wasn't really angry and hence bent down to enter. Everyone was secretly paying attention to what was going on inside. Indeed, Lawyer Ye's roar could be heard after a while. "Bai Shuili, get out of here." Anyway, no one saw anyone get out. Instead, the door was closed. In the calm office, Bai Shuili's back was against the door. She was carrying a little tortoise in her hand, and her head was lowered. "I'm really getting out." He glared at her angrily. She raised her head and suddenly laughed out. "I know you like me." Then, she ignored him and ran to the side to comfort Xiaobai. She placed him into the box carefully and even thought about how to draw a pattern on Xiaobai's back. She wrote the word Lin on it, which meant that it belonged to Lawyer Yi. She then picked up a gel pen and wrote on Xiaobai's back. Every stroke was meticulous. Yi Mulin was still glaring at her, looking at her lowered head. He didn't know why he wasn't angry anymore. Moreover, she said, "I know you like me." Actually, a worm wasn't that stupid. He just looked at her, looking at how stupid she was, looking at how she was drawing on Xiaobai's back. He didn't know why, but he walked over. When he saw it, he realized that she had written the word Lin. For a moment, he was so angry that he was in a mess. He put on a straight face. She seemed to be not afraid of him anymore. Was it because she thought that he liked her? Hence, he cleared his throat. "I don't like you. It's just that raising you is the same as raising Xiaobai." She still had her head lowered and retorted softly, "It's not the same." He stared at her. "How is it different?" Bai Shuili hugged Little White and blinked. "Can you satisfy your needs by hugging Little White at night?" Yi Mulin was about to scold her, but he gave up on the idea. He walked over and sat beside her. He held her in his arms, buried his handsome face in her neck, and took a bite. He chuckled. "Bai Shuili, do you mean that you can satisfy me tonight?" He even reached out to hold her chin, not giving her a chance to escape, and even forcing her to look at him. His thin lips lingered on the corner of her mouth, nibbling from time to time, very kissing. "Do you know how to satisfy me?" Riceworm looked at his lips, brushing them over and over again. She was almost dying from his teasing. However, he did not let her off as he chuckled out. "Bring Xiaobai home after work. I want her to see how Daddy dotes on Mummy and see how Mummy satisfies Daddy." She simply couldn't listen anymore and screamed, "Yi Mulin, you pervert." He laughed in a deep voice and pressed her down on the sofa to kiss her. He did not kiss her ferociously, but he kissed her everywhere. In the office outside, the subordinates looked at one another, unsure if the deep laughter that came from Lawyer Ye's office was the type of laughter that a man would have when he was bullying a woman. Lawyer Ye? Teasing. Chapter 34. Yi Mulin pressed her down and kissed her for a long time. He kissed her until her limbs went limp, and she let him do whatever he wanted. He lowered his head and pressed it against her forehead. His voice was a little hoarse. "If I say I like you, will you tell me the truth?" As he spoke, he lifted her chin. His little face was a little red. She stared at him. "Say it again." His face was dark, but he still said seriously, "Bai Shuili, although you are superficial and idle, you are still very cute." She blinked. Was this her husband's confession? "You like me being superficial?" She hooked her arms around his neck and asked with a slight smile. Yi Mulin lowered his head and kissed her lips. His voice was low. "I like all your flaws." She was furious. "I've decided not to like you." He chuckled. "How can you decide such a thing?" "I've decided." She snorted and kicked him. "Move aside and deal with your business." But he still didn't move. His expression was a little unpredictable. Then she realized why he was not moving. She glared at him and threw the little tortoise towards him. "Let Little Bai pacify you." He ignored the little jerk and grabbed her hand. "I'll make do." Because it was an office, he only asked for half of it. He grabbed her hand and bullied her through his pants. Bai Shuili widened her eyes and looked at him in disbelief. Although Yi Mulin was a little rough, he had never been so dirty before. Bai Shiuli's eyes widened. She looked a little stupid, but also a little innocent. Although she didn't know anything was idle and was shallow, in this materialistic world, she was really clean. She was so clean that he couldn't believe that a girl like her was still a virgin on their wedding night. He remembered that he was actually ecstatic at that time, but he couldn't control himself and could only continue violently. She was in pain, but he was in even more pain. Both his body and mind were in pain. At this moment, he felt a wave of pain. He looked down and saw a little white biting him. A tiny little tortoise was biting him through his pants. Yi Mulin was stunned. Bai Shiuli was stunned too. Then, she lay on the sofa and laughed. She was dying of laughter. He was bitten by Little White. She watched as he hurriedly took Xiao Bai down and threw on the coffee table. She leaned against the sofa and blushed. Actually, Xiao Bai can satisfy you too. Yi Mulin looked at her and sneered as he walked over. Her hair stood on end. Then, her little head was pressed over by him. His thin lips attached to her ear, and he whispered, Bai Shiuli, where did it bite? Comfort it for me. Of course, she didn't want to, so he rubbed her little head there, making a mess. That scene couldn't be watched anymore. Just then, the office door opened, and AI Wei's voice sounded. Mulin, I'm sorry. I left my USB drive here. With that, AI Wei looked at the two people on the sofa in a daze. What was he doing? Although AI Wei knew that Yi Mulin was a man, she never thought that he was such a lustful man. For a moment, she was stunned. After a long time, she came back to her senses. Sorry to disturb you. Bai Shiuli felt uncomfortable and stopped AI Wei hurriedly. No, I just sprained my neck. He's helping me. You guys can talk. Then she grabbed Xiao Bai and ran out as though she was escaping. Chapter 33-35. There was silence in the office. AI Wei took the USB and shrugged. I won't disturb you then. She looked at Yi Mulin with an indescribable look in her eyes. Just as she was about to leave, Yi Mulin suddenly called out, AI Wei. She froze, but didn't turn around. Yi Mulin's voice rang out. I once rejected her appearance and rejected her being in my life. But in the end, she still became my wife, even after I liked her for many years. AI Wei turned her head abruptly. At that moment, she looked at him as though she was looking at a lunatic or more like she was looking at a mental patient. She asked softly, You like her? Yi Mulin smiled faintly. Yes, I like her. I've liked her since she was young. AI Wei smiled strangely. Then she definitely doesn't know. Yi Mulin didn't say anything. Actually, it didn't matter whether Bai Shiuli knew or not. The key was that he liked her. AI Wei's face twitched unnaturally. After a long while, she forced a smile. It's unbelievable. She walked out, trying hard not to cry out loud. Why did she have to cry? He was the one who didn't appreciate her excellence. He had no taste. Outside, Bai Shiuli was still playing with Little White. She saw AI Wei come out looking upset, and her eyes were a little red. She guessed that her husband must have dealt a blow to AI Wei. Although she was happy, she didn't have the mood to pity AI Wei and continued playing with Little White. It wasn't that she didn't have sympathy, but if Yi Mulin and AI Wei got together, Bai Shiuli would be the one crying and no one would sympathize with her. Although she was an idiot, she had drunk a lot of chicken soup for the soul. Kindness to the enemy was the greatest cruelty to oneself. Hence, she wouldn't be soft-hearted. She didn't return to Yi Mulin's office either. He was so annoying just now, and she didn't want to be in his mouth again. As she thought about it, her face turned red. It was an indescribable beauty. She spent the entire afternoon playing with Little White. At 5 o'clock, Yi Mulin came out of the office with his coat and car keys, shocking all the junior lawyers and secretaries. It was only 5 o'clock. Was lawyer Yi going to get off work? Yi Mulin walked out and looked at the woman playing on the sofa. Let's go home. Wow, Lawyer Ye's way of expressing love is unique. Bai Shiuli stretched herself and looked up at him. You're off work? Isn't it too early? Yi Mulin's reply was to walk towards the door. She immediately brought Little White along and followed behind him. After they left, there was no sound in the office. After a long time, someone let out a long sigh of relief. Actually, the boss likes women. If Mrs. E doesn't look good, he probably won't hurry to get off work. The words "in a hurry to get off work" made people feel bored, and then everyone sighed. It was great to have a wife. Shuli followed Yi Mulin into the car and placed Little White in front of the windshield. Yi Mulin threw it into her arms in disgust. She was embarrassed, but she wasn't angry. He looked at her before he started the car, and she smiled at him. Stupid. He couldn't help but add, shallow. Instead of feeling ashamed, she felt proud. Actually, how is she stupid? Chapter 33-36. She mumbled softly. Yi Mulin just stared at her without saying anything. Shueli hugged Xiao Bai and mumbled softly, "Your father got off work so early. Will he go bankrupt and not be able to support us?" Yi Mulin turned his head and looked at her. She was talking to Xiao Bai seriously. She looked really stupid talking to herself. However, his mood was much better all of a sudden. Even Xiao Bai was much more pleasing to the eye. After driving for about 20 minutes, they arrived at a supermarket instead of his apartment. When he opened the door, he gestured for her to get down. Riceworm hugged the little tortoise and refused. "I'll stay here with Xiao Bai." Yi Mulin glared at her. "This is just a little tortoise by Shueli." She still refused. "I want to stay here with her. Xiao Bai is my child." He was speechless. "By Shueli, your child is still in my body." As soon as he said that, Riceworm put down Xiao Bai angrily. "Yi Mulin, you're super shameless now." Yi Mulin looked down at her and chuckled. He grabbed her hand and brought her out of the car. After closing the door, he held her hand and walked into the supermarket like an old couple. Bai Shueli's face was filled with fear the moment she entered. What the hell is this place? Other than nightclubs, she went to high-end shopping malls. It was her first time coming to such a place. Yi Mulin put his arm around her shoulder and said in a low voice, "Waste recycling station." "You're scolding me," she said angrily. Then she whispered, "If you think I'm stupid, don't have a child with me. If you don't want to have a child, don't force me to do it." He looked down at her and smiled. He did not say anything and just brought her to buy groceries. Riceworm was indeed a riceworm. She did not even know what vegetables were. She thought that all green vegetables were the same. She took one of each and put them in the shopping cart. She took them randomly, and Yi Mulin took them back for her. He picked some steaks, prawns, vegetables, and milk. The cart was full. When they reached downstairs to pay the bill, she could not walk anymore. She stood in front of the cart and let him push it. At first, his face was black. "Bai Shueli, are you a 3-year-old child?" She snorted and hugged his arm. "I can't walk anymore." He was walking fast in front of her, so she had no choice but to hug his waist from behind. Yi Mulin sighed. It had only been a day, and he had spoiled her to the heavens. Pausing for a moment, his face darkened, and his tone wasn't too good either. "Bai Shueli, others will laugh at you. I don't care about them. My legs are sore. It's all your fault," she murmured, hugging him and pressing her face against his back. No matter how hard Yi Mulin's heart was, it softened a little. He turned sideways and picked her up with one arm. He put her on the front of the car and said, "Hold my arm." Riceworm supported him and said in disbelief, "You want to push me along? Do I have to hug you?" His face was dark and his tone was fierce, but she was not afraid of him. Riceworm put her hands on his shoulders. She stood at the same height as him and could see his beautiful face. She suddenly realized that he was really good-looking. She hadn't noticed it before. "Bai Shueli, don't you feel irritated by staring at a man like this?" He stared at her coldly with his elite face. Riceworm said, "But you are my husband. Is there anything wrong with me looking at you?" He was stunned for a moment and then took 2 big boxes from the shelf angrily. Bai Shueli saw that it was 001. She bit her lip. Who is using it? Her voice was lingering and a little pretentious. Chapter 33-37. Yi Mulin looked at her and gave her a warm smile. "Who do you think needs it?" She stopped talking, got down from the shopping cart, and hugged his arm instead. This was also one of the special skills that Yi Mulin found out about her. She seemed to have no bones wherever she went, and she liked to hug something. She liked to hug a pillow when she slept, hugged a pillow when she lay on the sofa, and hugged someone when she walked. She was a child who had not fully developed intelligence. Yi Mulin glanced at her and smiled faintly. Then, He queued up to pay the bill. Riceworm hugged his arm and asked in a low voice, "Will Little Bai have an accident in the car? I've seen a lot of news about parents leaving their children in the car, and then something happened to the child." Yim Yulin's face was cold. "Bai Xueli, it's a tortoise." She nodded and looked at him again. After a while, she said in a low voice, "I'm just worried. It's my first time raising a pet." For some reason, Yim Yulin's heart softened. He lowered his voice and said, "You will be a good mother in the future." He thought that they should have a daughter first, a little girl like her. It was fine if she was a little stupid, as long as she was cute. When she calmed down a little, they could have a boy. If she only wanted to have 2 children, they could force Mu Bai to have one. Because of this, his expression was very gentle. At this moment, a well-dressed woman in front of them turned around and looked at the couple in surprise, especially Bai Xueli. She asked hesitantly, "Are you Bai Xueli?" Bai Xueli's face did not look good. She flipped her hair and said, "Yes, don't you recognize me?" The well-dressed woman put on a smile, but it was not a friendly one. "I didn't expect you to show up here, did I? Why are you here to buy groceries when your life is not going well?" The woman covered her mouth and laughed. "I heard that your marriage was ruined by Yimu Bai. It was written in the newspaper." Bai Xueli lowered her head and played with her delicate fingernails. "Yes, my marriage was ruined, but I got married again." That woman looked at Yim Yulin vigilantly. Once she saw that face of an elite that was ascetic, that woman almost laughed out loud. God, he was really good looking. Back when Bai Xueli was in high school, she was especially arrogant because of her good family background. She didn't put anyone in her eyes. So when they found out that she had been stood up on the day of her wedding, her high school classmates talked about it for many days. However, the man she casually married now was quite good looking. She just didn't know if he had the money. But thinking about it, a man who came to the supermarket to buy groceries, what kind of future could he have? Therefore, Fu Gue Hua smiled reservedly. "Surely it's been hard on you. You still have to cook after getting married. Sai, I actually want to taste the hardships of life. Unfortunately, my husband has a small company. He wants to save face, so he has to hire 2 servants to serve me at home." As he spoke, he looked at Bai Xueli. "Don't tell me you're going to do your own laundry and cook now." Bai Xueli glanced at Yim Yulin and said softly, "There are no servants at home. My clothes are washed by my husband and mother-in-law, and my food is also cooked by my husband." Fu Gue Hua smiled reluctantly. "I still love you, but I have to love you after marrying you." She glanced at the 2 boxes of T-shirts in the shopping cart, both of which were extra large. Chapter 33-38. Looking at the large size of the shopping cart, Fu Gue Hua couldn't stay calm anymore and used her body to block the cart. There were 2 boxes inside as well, but they were small. She scolded her man in her heart for being useless, but she still put on a smile on her face. "Xueli, our school is going to celebrate our anniversary soon. Everyone is going to have a gathering there. You and your husband are going, right? Let's get to know each other." She glanced at Yim Yulin and determined that he was a good-looking but useless man. It was probably because the Bai family had paid a lot of money for him to marry Bai Xueli. Bai Xueli looked at the time and place of Fu Gue Hua and looked at Yim Yulin. Yim Yulin's voice was calm. "Since it's our alma mater, we have to go. I'll arrange the time next week." Riceworm nodded and looked at Fu Gue Hua. "We'll be there." Fu Gue Hua added, "You have to donate when you go, Xueli. Don't forget to ask your dad for some money." Although her classmates didn't like Bai Xueli, they had to admit that the Bai family was really rich. They couldn't kill her even if they wanted to. After paying the bill, they walked to the parking lot. Bai Xueli got in the car first while Yim Yulin was in charge of putting the things into the trunk. He took off his jacket and only wore a shirt, which showed his sturdy figure. Returning to the car, she hugged Xiao Bai and poked his chest, saying softly, "Don't you know how to refute being treated as a gigolo?" Yim Yulin looked at himself in the mirror and said calmly, "Since you don't mind, why should I mind?" As he said that, he looked at her. "Am I right?" She turned her head and sat down awkwardly. "Let's go." He started the car and said calmly, "I bought a cookbook." Riceworm felt goosebumps all over her body. Did he mean, "You can't just do nothing, can you?" He focused on driving and looked at the road ahead. It's an honor to let your mother-in-law and husband wash your clothes. Hmm? She lowered her head and resisted. Then get someone to do it. I don't do it anyway, and it's not like I don't contribute. Amused, he tilted his head to look at her as he lit a cigarette. Ricebug protested. Yi Mulin, you are not allowed to smoke in the car. Do you hear me? He smiled. I won't smoke anymore when you're pregnant. When he said that, she then remembered that he bought tea, which meant that he wouldn't let her get pregnant for the time being. Then, wouldn't she have to suffer all kinds of hardships? Thinking of this, she made a bitter face and did not want to talk to him. Yi Mulin was focused on driving. He only turned to look at her when the lights were red and blew a smoke ring on her face. She cried out in anger and hugged Little White pitifully. From time to time, he would let out a low and deep laughter. Just like that, 10 minutes later, they arrived at his apartment. It was the most luxurious platinum apartment in B City. He lived on the top floor, and the entire floor was his apartment. It was 500 to 600 square meters. When Baishuli walked in, she stared blankly. This place was very different from what she had imagined. She had thought that it would only be a small apartment of about 100 square meters, but this place was bigger than she had imagined. The decoration was mainly calm, and the main color was gray. She stood at the door, her bare feet stepping on the soft wool carpet. She asked softly, "Can our Xiaobai have a room to himself?" Chapter 33-39. She immediately ran over and looked around before running back to him. "Let's keep it in our bedroom." Yi Mulin carried the things in and said calmly, "You could buy a bigger vat for it, but you can't put it at the head of the bed." "Why?" Lawyer Yi paused for a moment before saying seriously, "I don't want to be stared at by a little tortoise when we're making love." "What?" Riceworm blushed and ran back to the bedroom with Little White in her arms. It put Little White in a shelf and thought that it should find a new place for Little White to live in and find some grass and fake mountains. She looked at it foolishly for a while before sneaking to the dining room. Through the glass, she could see Yi Mulin preparing ingredients in the kitchen. She sat on the dining chair and looked outside with her chin propped on her hand. She wasn't completely clueless. This apartment was worth at least 200 million yuan. She sighed softly. It was better to be a lawyer. Even though her father was in a high position, how would he dare to live in such a luxurious apartment, even if he had money? It would be strange if he wasn't skinned from the inside out. As she thought about it, she suddenly felt that marrying Yi Mulin wasn't a bad idea. Even though she had to contribute a little at night, his skills were really good. Now, it didn't hurt anymore and was actually quite comfortable. Even though his face was always dark, it was undeniably good-looking. It wasn't any worse than Mubai's. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that it was worth it. She just didn't know how long he was willing to take her in. She felt a little sad as she thought about it, and ran to the kitchen to watch him prepare food. She didn't know anything and hugged Yi Mulin from behind. "You're working so hard. You might as well hire someone to do it." "Hubby, my heart aches for you." His body froze for a moment before he chuckled. "By Shuili, are you avoiding doing housework? My heart aches for my hubby? It's all nonsense." She rubbed against him in embarrassment and pouted. Her face was plaster on his back. "My heart aches for you." He lowered his head to look at her, wringing her little hands, and laughed silently. With a very soft voice, he said, "Tonight, you should feel sorry for yourself." As he said that, he pinched her chin with the hand that he used to cut onions and said dangerously, "I won't let you off." The riceworm stared at him and realized in hindsight that he would have to pay with his body if he ate this meal. Moreover, he obviously wanted to play some new tricks. The smell of onions made her eyes water. She looked at him pitifully. "Yi Mulin, I want to go home." She didn't want to stay here even if it was 2 billion. Lawyer Yi glanced at her and said lightly, "If you marry a chicken, follow the chicken. If you marry a dog, follow the dog. If you don't live with me, who will you live with?" "Do you think I will let you go back to the mansion and continue to flirt with Mubai?" She choked on her words. "What flirting? Mubai and I are innocent, all right? If Mubai was willing, you would have climbed into his bed a long time ago." The more the Yi family's eldest brother spoke, the angrier he became. A strong arm carried her to the counter, and his big hand was about to touch her. Riceworm was scared to death. He immediately hooked his neck. "No, What a joke. If his palm were to touch her, that place, it would be a wonder if she wouldn't be spiced to death. He was bad. He bullied her, and he didn't have any good intentions. Lawyer Yi looked down at her scared look. She shrank into a small ball in his arms. He couldn't help laughing and patted her. Go play by yourself. There's a home theater. Dinner will be ready soon. Chapter 3340. After he said that, he hugged her, and Riceworm immediately ran away. She didn't want to be stained with the smell of onions. However, when she went to the movies, her face was red. After a while, she climbed onto the sofa and hugged a pillow in her arms. When Emulin came to wake her up after making dinner, she was already asleep. She slept very peacefully, lying on her side and hugging the pillow in her arms. Her long hair was a little messy on her shoulders, but it made her look especially young and innocent. She was stupid. He chuckled, but didn't wake her up immediately. Instead, he squatted down and looked at her face carefully. He hated her for a period of time, but now he couldn't figure out whether he hated her because he couldn't accept her beauty or because she didn't notice him and was always around Mumbai. But now it didn't seem important. What was important was that she was here. He sighed softly. Stupid people always had such a good life. Other than being not very prominent when she was young, her life was smooth sailing. So, she was also very willful and arrogant, but at this moment, she was so soft. Before he came back to his senses, his fingertips gently rubbed her face. There was a kind of pity that shocked him. In shock, he retracted his fingers, but he still carefully recalled the feeling of his fingertips. Riceworm woke up in a daze and hugged the pillow as she yawned. Dinner is ready. Emulin looked at her peaceful appearance, as if everything was fine. He wanted to press on her and bully her, but he still calmed himself down and only said softly, "Get up and eat." She sat up, still a little absent-minded. She flipped her hair and looked at him. Her expression was blank. He couldn't help but soften his heart. He walked over and pinched her face. "Are you stupid? Go eat." She said, "Oh," and immediately came down, but her legs were weak. Her body was picked up by a strong arm. She looked at him eagerly, and then her body was lifted in the air. It was a princess carry. Riceworm was a little surprised and a little shy. Her face was on his shoulder, and it was steaming. She was about to burn. At this moment, his voice sounded, "Isn't it good to have a big house?" She hugged his neck. "What do you mean?" He chuckled. "Don't you like me to carry you? This way, I can hug you a little longer." She hated it, but she couldn't refute it. He carried her to the dining room and put her down. "All right, stop lying in my arms." Riceworm sat up straight and protested in a low voice, "I'm not in your arms." He only took a glance at her and said faintly while serving the dishes, "After dinner, you wash the dishes." Riceworm's eyes widened. "Emulin, I won't. You didn't even know how to make love before, and now you're not very good at holding me and cooperating with me. It's even easier to wash the dishes," he said shamelessly. Riceworm was so angry that he didn't want to eat anymore. He smiled. "I can be a little more lenient with you today." She looked at him. "Someone came to clean it, right? If not, I refuse to live in such a big house." As long as she thought about being treated as a maid here, she refused. Emulin chuckled softly. "Yes, someone is cleaning, but aren't you a little too bored?" "I'm not bored," Riceworm said impatiently. "I can take care of Little White, and I can accompany you to work." The Yi family's eldest brother smiled again. "It sounds like you're very busy." Riceworm didn't say anything. She just pulled his arm and acted like a spoiled child. She didn't want to do housework. He didn't like it if she became ugly and rough. Chapter 3341. Emulin looked at her and chuckled. Then, he placed her on the dining table. Tonight, he didn't cook Western food, but traditional Chinese food with 4 dishes and 1 soup. Bai Shuli looked at it and felt a little amazed. "You know how to cook Chinese food, too?" He placed the bag beside her hand silently. "Is it weird?" She ate in silence and didn't make a sound. Emulin looked at her and said after a while, "Are you angry again?" "No." She muttered softly, "I'm not angry. I just don't want to talk." Emulin chuckled. "Do you like Western food or Chinese food?" Actually, she liked Western food, but now she felt that it was quite good for the two of them to eat a few dishes together. Hence, she said softly, Chinese food, Western food can be eaten outside. She didn't know why, but her reply was very pleasing to his ears. Yulin thought for a while and said, how about this? I'll ask the auntie to cook here for lunch in the future, and I'll come back earlier at night. Are you going to cook for me? She looked up at him eagerly. Yulin stroked her hair. As long as you're good and take care of Xiaobai at home, I'll cook for you when I come back. She asked hurriedly, what about your business trip? He was overseas for half a month. His focus had always been in New York, and he only returned to China in the past 2 years. Yulin didn't even think about it and said, if I'm going on a business trip, you can come with me. Riceworm felt a little satisfied and focused on eating. Perhaps she didn't realize that this was happiness. Yulin had always been a light eater and finished his meal quickly. After she finished, he put the bowl into the dishwasher. Riceworm stared at the high-tech equipment for a long time, feeling silly and stupid. He reached out and pinched her face. I'll go to the study. You can take a shower first. Then, he leaned over and whispered in her ear, don't fall asleep. Riceworm looked at him eagerly, her face hot. He smiled and went into the study. She went to the master bedroom. It was huge, and the things they bought today had been sent over. She didn't know who received them, but they were all neatly placed on the bed. She walked to the changing room and opened the wardrobe door. It was full of his clothes, neatly arranged in rows. There were jackets, shirts, trousers, and some underwear. The styles were similar, with blue, white, gray, and black. It was low-key and luxurious. One of the cabinets was open. She placed her clothes inside and stepped back to take a look. She bit her lip in a daze. Just as she was in a daze, an arm wrapped around her waist and a warm breath blew on the side of her neck. The voice was also very soft. What are you thinking about? Riceworm was stunned for a moment and, subconsciously, turned his head. Why are you here? I'm here to get a document, he said as he looked at the closet. It was still very empty. He would help her fill it up another day. However, he still praised her first. I didn't expect you to hang clothes. With that, he let go of her with a chuckle. Riceworm was deeply insulted. Watching him walk out with the documents, he followed a few steps. I'm not retarded. He looked back at her with a look that said, aren't you? She stopped in her tracks and said the same thing. If you think I'm stupid, you can find someone smarter. Yulin chuckled. By Shueli, are you planning to use these words to eat me alive? She lowered her head. I wouldn't dare. Lawyer Yi is so smart. Chapter 33:42. Riceworm's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to ask something, but he pinched her face gently and walked out. She pouted her little mouth. What? He didn't finish his words. When he said the most unwise thing to do, did he mean marrying her? She didn't believe it. Marrying her was the most beneficial thing for the Yi family. She was the one who vomited blood, okay? He was cruel, liked to hit her, liked to use force on her, and even gave her a cold look from time to time. But she thought in her heart he didn't hit her anymore. He often forced her to beg him, and he even cooked for her. Were you really going to vomit blood? Bai Shuili ran to the bathroom and looked at herself. Her face was blushing. She bit her lip and filled the bathtub with warm water. There were even rose petals. She felt very relaxed in it. After the bath, her body smelled good. She put on the bathrobe and dried her hair. She didn't wear the sexy pajamas he bought. She walked directly to the master bedroom and talked with Xiaobai for a while. Xiaobai ignored her. Looking at the time, it was already 10 o'clock. Yulin still didn't want to go back to the room. She directly threw herself on the soft gray bed. As soon as she looked up, she saw 2 large boxes of t-shirts on the bedside table. She took them and looked at them. Then she put them back. She rubbed her face against the sheets and didn't want to sleep. When Yulin returned to the bedroom, he saw her eyes were closed and she was about to fall asleep. He walked over, bent over, and whispered in her ear, "Didn't I ask you to wait for me?" Riceworm woke up at once. She opened her eyes wide and looked at him. "Are you done?" He nodded his head in a reserved manner and unbuttoned the collar of his shirt. "I'm going to take a bath first." Bai Shuili sat up and shook her head. She was still in a daze. His style seemed to have changed. In the past, he didn't need to take a bath in the mansion. He always came directly. Why was he so particular now? Yulin stood at the door of the bathroom and chuckled. Life needs a sense of ceremony, Mrs. Yi. She bit her lip. I'm going to sleep. He didn't say anything and went to take a bath directly. Time passed quickly. He came out in less than 10 minutes. He casually put on a bathrobe and walked to the bed. Bai Shulan hugged a pillow and seemed to be asleep. He lay down beside her and looked at her, then turned off the light. The body beside him relaxed. She thought that he would let her go, but he continued. For the first time, you'll feel more comfortable after turning off the lights. With that said, he grabbed her and pulled her into his embrace. Her furry little head slid down from his firm lower abdomen. Riceworm was shocked. That was when she realized that he wasn't violent at all. He was hurting her right now. She wanted to resist, but he seemed to be interested. She did not want to recall the whole process. Every moment made her blush and her heart beat faster. But she peeped at him in the darkness. The sound he made was nice, and there was a hint of vulnerability in it. Yulin could also be weak. She relaxed for a moment and was immediately patted by him. Focus, huh? She whimpered. Yulin was too evil. Raising her for an entire day was probably waiting for this moment. She sobbed, and he laughed like a spring breeze. Chapter 33:43. Finally, it was all over. Riceworm lay in his arms, sweating profusely. She felt as if all her energy had been sucked out of her. She stroked his chest with her finger and asked softly, You sit in the office every day. How did you get a six-pack? Yulin caressed her back and chuckled. I know how to play golf. She did not believe that one could have muscles from playing golf, so she poked him. I haven't seen you work out recently. He looked at her meaningfully. Riceworm, who was as dumb as Riceworm, understood immediately. She bit her lip and did not say anything for a long time. Yulin chuckled. Go take a shower? After a few times, his body was covered in hot sweat. The Riceworm was lying on his body and did not move. She looked very lazy. How could he not understand? So he carried her and walked to the bathroom. However, the result of her laziness was that he could not help but push her into the bathroom for another round of pleasure. After this time, Yulin was almost done. He carried her back to the bedroom, and Riceworm quickly fell asleep. Late at night, she slept soundly in his arms. However, he did not feel sleepy at all. He leaned against the headboard and looked at the girl in his arms quietly. He used to be so resistant, but now he was so happy that he could not sleep. There was a touch of lust in his eyes. He reached out and touched her face again. Idiot. That idiot hugged his waist and rubbed his face against it, looking very satisfied. He looked at her, and his heart softened. Actually, Bai Shuli was a girl who was easily satisfied. He did not hit her or hit her. She was satisfied just by cooking a meal for her. It had been a few days, and she did not want to go out to play. He looked at her and seemed to remember a little girl who became more and more playful because her parents were busy. Actually, she was very obedient when she was young, just like now. His fingers gently touched her little face, and a faint smile appeared on his face. He lay down and hugged her with one hand. The night deepened. On the top floor of the tallest apartment in B City, there was a touch of sweetness in the air because she had finally entered Yulin's world. Bai Shuli slept very well that night. It was a little cold at night, and she stayed close to that warm place. It was a comfortable night. She woke up early in the morning. Of course, a man with a six-pack wouldn't give her a morning kiss because he always got up early. Opening her eyes, she couldn't hear anything outside. Thinking for a moment, she got up and greeted Xiao Bai before walking to the dining room. The house was so big that it was hard to walk, she complained. The apartment was quiet except for the Western-style breakfast in the dining room. There were 2 glasses of milk on the table. 2 glasses. Her thoughts were a little entangled, and she immediately ran barefoot to the study. Yulin. He pushed open the door and called out, but it was empty inside. She was a little disappointed and took the opportunity to look around the study. The study was very large, taking up about 60 square meters. There was a huge wall of books filled with original documents, a set of leather sofas, and a place where he worked. The decoration was commendable, but not extravagant. Everything was practical. She left the room, feeling a little disappointed. On the first day of their cohabitation, he ditched her and went to the office, Just as she stepped out of the apartment, the door opened. The person who walked in was none other than Yulin. Chapter 33:44. Baishuali would never admit that when she looked at him, her heart skipped a beat. She looked at him and said in a meek voice, "Why didn't you call me when you went jogging? Can you get up?" Yulin walked in and wiped his sweat with a towel. Then he threw it on her head and said, "Don't walk barefooted in the future." After that, he walked into the bathroom in the master bedroom. Riceworm pulled the towel off her head, bit her lips, and stared at him. Yulin had already entered the bathroom and closed the door. She stuck out her tongue, threw the towel aside, and ran to talk to Little Bai. Little Bai curled up there and didn't say a word. She talked to herself for a long time. When Yulin finally came out, he saw that she was still standing barefooted and frowned. "Baishuali, do you want me to say it again?" She blinked and lifted her foot. "Are you talking about this?" She said very slowly, "I've always been like this." Yulin had already changed his set of clothes. He walked over and picked her up. She lay on his shoulder and clenched her fists. "Yulin, what do you want?" He walked a few steps quickly and threw her on the bed, not very gently. "Put on your shoes." He added, "I'll throw you out the door next time." She stared at him and said discontentedly, "Can't you be gentler?" Yulin was buttoning his cufflinks and glanced at her. "Wasn't I gentle last night?" Thinking of her useless look, he couldn't help hugging him and asking him to be gentle and slow. But he couldn't help but speed up after a while. Their eyes stared at each other with a different meaning. She was embarrassed to ask again and put on her shoes quietly. "I'm going to brush my teeth." "Wait a minute." He quickly grabbed her hand and said in a low voice, "Good morning, kiss." Then she was kissed by him, lips against lips, and then he kissed deeply. When she felt him pressing against her lips, she opened her eyes wide and said in a vague voice, "Yulin, this is not a good morning kiss." It was clearly a French kiss. Not only did he kiss her, but he also pushed her against the bed. What did he mean? She stared at him with her eyes wide open. Yulin finally ended the kiss and pressed his lips against hers. "Push me away, or I can't stop." Very quickly, she felt that there was something unusual about him. She blushed and struggled away from the side. She wanted to get up, but she had no strength in her body. She could only lie there weakly. Her pajamas had long been pulled loosely and hung on her body. Yulin adjusted her clothes with his fingers and buried his face in her neck. After a long time, he said, "I was wrong." She was stunned for a moment. Then he kissed her ear and said in a husky voice, "I underestimated my expectations for you." Baishuali's face turned red. She immediately pushed him away and ran into the bathroom. He didn't get up immediately. Instead, he lay down on the bed to calm himself down before walking to the bathroom. Riceworm was brushing his teeth. Seeing him come in, he was somewhat on guard. Yulin hugged her from behind and kissed the side of her neck. "Let's continue tonight, okay?" "Okay." She answered obediently while brushing her teeth. Yulin couldn't bear to let her go. He didn't want to let her go at all. Why did he let her go just now? Chapter 33:45. Baishuali looked at him in the mirror and continued to brush her teeth. He smiled and went out. Riceworm dawdled for another 10 minutes and then went out. When she walked to the dining room, Yulin answered a phone call and looked up at her. "Come and sit down." She sat down and bit the sandwich. "Are you going to the office?" Then she quickly added, "Can Xiaobai and I go together?" Yulin drank the milk in the cup. "Annie will come to clean up and make lunch. You can go out in the afternoon." He said this, but didn't answer her directly. Riceworm lowered her head. "I want to go to the mansion." Yulin was stunned and looked at her. "Don't you like flower arrangement and tea art?" She protested in a low voice. "I don't like it, but it's boring to be alone here. I know you are against me playing with those friends." In the past, her social circle was nothing more than flaunting her wealth and gathering together to have fun. But at that time, Baishuali wanted to give the best of herself to Mubai, so she never touched those messy things. When she just got married, she missed those friends, but now she felt that it was meaningless. Besides, he didn't like it. After she finished speaking, Yulin looked at her and smiled. "You can go shopping or something." Baishuali nodded, knowing that he didn't want her to go to the old house every day. But she was bored, and she didn't want to work. It was too tiring. So she bit her lip and looked at him. Do you need a secretary? The kind of secretary who does the best things are done by you. Mullen was angry and funny at the same time. He took a tissue to wipe his lower lip and then said slowly, You mean a little secretary? By Shiweli, you meet all the requirements except for one. You are Mrs. Yi. I don't need to spend money to hire a free job. She whispered, Then will you find another woman? He stared at her, and his eyes were so deep as if he could see through her soul. After a long time, he smiled, No, I don't have much interest in women. She was happy when he said that, but she also complained that he didn't have any interest. She didn't know who asked for it for a whole night and then got bored early in the morning. Obviously, he liked women's bodies. She bit her bread and stared at him. At this moment, the doorbell rang. He walked over to open the door. It was the aunt he had invited. The auntie worked here for 3 hours a day, cleaning and cooking. Mullen was currently doing the laundry himself. Also, he wouldn't allow anyone to touch the master bedroom and the study. In the future, she felt that she had to do it. After Bai Shiweli introduced himself to the auntie, he went out. As soon as he left, Riceworm felt that she couldn't even eat properly. At this moment, her phone rang again. She looked at it and saw that it was an unknown number. She picked it up, and it turned out to be the rich flower from last night. Bai Shiweli, your phone number hasn't changed. Riceworm ran into the master bedroom and closed the door. He threw himself onto the soft bed. What's the matter? Fu Gue Hua chuckled. It's like this, Shirley. I accidentally mentioned your marriage and your husband in the group today, so everyone invited you to join the group. Bai Shiweli immediately sat up. She had made a lot of enemies in high school. Maybe now she was taking revenge. Moreover, if Mullen found out about what she had done in the past, he would definitely skin her alive. Just the thought of it made his scalp tingle. Chapter 3346. Bai Shiweli thought about it and said, Forget it, I won't join the group. Besides, she didn't want to go to the school anniversary. It would be fine if she went alone, but if Mullen went too, she would be dead meat. She wasn't that stupid and courting death. She was Mrs. Yi now, living in a house of 400 to 500 square meters and having a monthly allowance of 10 to 20 million yuan. She would die to meet those women. After Bai Shiweli said that, she didn't care whether Fu Hua was willing or not and hung up the phone. As soon as she hung up, her phone rang. She thought it was still a call from the rich and powerful flower, so she picked it up and said angrily, I said I'm not going. Were you not going? Her husband's voice came from the other side of the phone. It was deep and pleasant. Bai Shiweli's heart cursed, and she unconsciously licked her lips. She said in a low voice, Why did you call? Aren't you driving? He said, I'm in the garage. Take a document from my desk in the study. Riceworm said, Oh, and ran over immediately. His voice came from the other side of the phone. Don't forget your shoes. She ran into the study and found the document he was talking about. Then, she ran to the door and put on her shoes after a few steps. She didn't hear the auntie calling her, and the elevator went down to the basement. After a few steps, she saw Mullen sitting in the car, looking down at the phone in his hand. She ran to the car and knocked on the window. He slid down the glass. Document. Riceworm handed the document to him. Mullen took the document from her hand slowly and looked down. It's this. She said, Oh, and took a step back. Mullen looked up and said gently, Who did you call when you said you weren't going? Riceworm looked at his slightly probing eyes and said softly, The one I saw last night, Ma Fong Fong. After that, she looked straight at him. It's not important. Aren't you going to the office? Mullen rubbed his chin and said playfully, I still have time to interrogate you. Riceworm said softly, Then why don't you get the document yourself? He looked her up and down and said, after a long time, You're too fat. You should exercise more. Riceworm was furious. How am I fat? You're not fat now, but what about in the future? His gaze was deep, as if his words had a double meaning. She looked at him. What do you want to ask? He didn't beat around the bush with her. Why don't you want to go to the anniversary? He leaned against the window and motioned for her to pass. No matter how unwilling the riceworm was, it did not dare to disobey his orders, so it went over. Her chin was gently pinched and caressed, his voice low and husky, What have you done that you don't want me to know? She immediately felt guilty and stammered. What do you mean? She thought for a moment, then confidently said, You're my only man. This is about the body. What about the spirit? He stared at her little face, his voice slow but dangerous. Other than Mumbai, is there no one else? She was even more incoherent. Where was there anyone else? I was only a teenager then. It was already accurate down to the age, and he still said he didn't have it. Chapter 33:47. Baishuli was stunned and looked at him blankly. She wanted to explain, but couldn't. She stuttered for a long time without saying a word. The hateful man had already rolled up the window, started the car, and drove away. Riceworm got a nose full of dust and stomped her feet angrily. He was too hateful, but she slowly came to her senses. What 13-years-old puberty? What 14-years-old menarche? How did Yimulin know? What a pervert. He actually paid attention to her secretly. Riceworm's face turned pale and then red. She wanted to call him and scold him, but she thought, what if something happened if she called him while he was driving? She stomped her feet for a while and then returned to the apartment. The Annie saw that she didn't look well and didn't dare to ask. Yimulin was driving and his face was even worse than hers. Although he was not as close to Baishuli as Mumbai, he had also paid attention to her for many years, and he knew her character. Attracting bees and butterflies. These 4 words were the most accurate to describe her. He went to the office with a pale face. Secretary Lee reported to him about the work of the day and then left carefully. When he was outside, he coughed lightly. Boss seems to be having a bad sex life. Everyone, be careful. Everyone laughed warmly. In the office, Yimulin's entire body was thrown into the leather chair, putting himself in a state of vacuum. However, this was very rare for him. He was very busy, and he should be dealing with a mountain of work. Every second of his time was worth a lot of money, but now he was daydreaming. Because of his wife's bad behavior, he was sure that she felt guilty because she did something wrong to him in high school. Otherwise, why would she suddenly feel guilty? Yimulin pursed his lips and played with his phone. At this time, his phone rang. It was a WeChat friend request. He never used WeChat, but a while ago, Baishuli added it for him and then added him. She said that it was a good tool to find out if a man had an affair. His current friend are either his subordinates or her. He glanced at it. It was a person called Ma Fong Fong. Ma Fong Fong? He frowned. He didn't know him. But his intuition told him that this was a very important person, so he reached out his finger and accepted. The phone immediately beeped again, and the other side sent a picture. It was the expression of a woman seducing a man at the beginning. Don't ask him why he knew, because his family's riceworm told him. Yimulin smiled. Just as he was about to delete Ma Fong Fong, another message came in quickly. I'm Shirley's classmate. We met last night. Yimulin furrowed his brows and recalled the rich and noble flower he saw last night. His looks were not bad, but he was slightly muscular. Also, his taste was like that of a nouveau riche. He replied without batting an eyelid. What's up? Ma Fong Fong immediately started the voice chat. He rambled on and on about Baishuli's refusal to attend the school anniversary, whether it was because of the past that she refused to go, and how Yimulin had persuaded her. I will convince me. Surely. Yimulin sent a short message. After Ma Fong Fong sent a few more messages, he changed the topic. We've talked for so long, but I still don't know what you do for a living. If you're from an ordinary family, it's not easy for you to bear Shirley's temper, right? Yimulin curled his lips and changed to a hoarse and low voice. Thankfully, Shirley is just a little headstrong. These words had a deep meaning, and Ma Fong Fong was happy to hear it. Later, she learned that Yimulin was a lawyer. She didn't ask for his name, but just said warmly, Lawyer Yi, you must be very good at talking. These 4 words made Yimulin smile thoughtfully. He said very slowly, Shweli is better than me. These words made Ma Fong Fong's heart burst with joy. She was very hypocritical and wanted to give it a try. Yimulin's face was cold, but he pretended to respond to her. Ma Fong Fong said what she should and shouldn't say. After she said this, Yimulin immediately blocked her. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to dig something out, he wouldn't let such an ugly woman into his world. This woman was not only ugly, but also stupid. How could she be compared to the worm in his house? At least the worm was good-looking. Other than fat, what else did this woman have? Yi Mulin threw his phone down. His face was livid as he took out a cigarette and put it in his mouth. He lit it and took a long drag. Fuck, what did he hear? By Shirley. He wanted to break her legs. No wonder her grades were so bad in high school and university. It turned out that she was chasing after handsome men. She would catch anyone who looked like Mubai. She would not let go of anyone who had a similar nose, a similar mouth, or even a hand. She found a boyfriend, but after 3 or 4 days, she threw him away and looked for another target. Did she think she was a stamp collector? There was another photo. She was with a boy who looked like Mubai. At that time, she was very young, leaning on the boy's shoulder and smiling brightly. Damn it. One Mubai had already made him very uncomfortable. Now there was this pretty boy. Yi Mulin reached for the phone and opened it to look at the old photo. Gu Chong phone. He heard that he was now a very famous photographer. He was not in the country, but he was also at the party. And it was by Shirley, the only male classmate of the Queen of Stamp, collecting for more than a month. He finally knew why she did not dare to go to the party. Lao Qing was there, so of course she did not dare to take him there. Yi Mulin sneered and abruptly threw the phone far away. He wondered if she had kissed this man before, or if her developed body had been touched by this man. Just thinking about it was enough to make him furious. At noon, Bai Shirley called and said carefully that the Annie had gone back. She did not know how to use the dishwasher after lunch. Yi Mulin's face was cold. Bai Shirley, what is in your head? She was stunned for a moment and seemed a little hurt. You taught me once, but I didn't know how to do it. Why don't you teach me again tonight, okay? Her tone was very soft, like a little girl who had been bullied. No matter how angry he was, he still suppressed it and closed his eyes. I won't come back for dinner tonight. What about me? She asked softly, in a very careful and flattering way. She thought that he was going to take her out for dinner. After all, they had just moved out, so it was normal for him to be nice to her. But Yi Mulin said coldly, I have work to do. She said, then I won't wait for you. Actually, what she wanted to ask was if she could go out if he did not come back, and she did not know how to cook. But he was very cold, so she did not dare to ask. She hung up the phone, feeling a little disappointed. That special sweet and good feeling disappeared in an instant. She always felt that he had something on his mind. She always felt that he was alienating her and giving her the cold shoulder. Chapter 33:48. After hanging up the phone, Bai Shirley went to bed angrily. She slept until 5 or 6 in the afternoon, but Yi Mulin didn't call to say that he was coming back. He said that he had to work overtime, and she didn't dare to disturb him, afraid that he would be even angrier. Thinking of this, she was actually a little angry with herself. When did she, Bai Shirley, become so useless that she was actually so afraid of a man being angry? It wasn't just a meal ticket. It wasn't like the Bai family couldn't afford to raise her. But there was a voice in her heart that said, it's not like that. You clearly like him to raise you and spoil you. She pursed her lips and sat by the bed angrily for a long time. She was angry at herself and him. Her stomach was growling with hunger. He was so despicable. He said that he would cook for her tonight, but he didn't come back. Bai Shirley picked up the phone, looked at it, and hesitated for a while before calling him. The call went through, but he didn't pick up. The arrogant lawyer didn't want to hear her voice, so he let the phone ring again and again, but he didn't pick up. Bai Shirley threw the phone angrily, got up, and changed to go out for dinner. She drove out. There were 4 or 5 cars parked in Yi Mulin's garage, and there was a white BMW for her to drive. She walked over to open the door and sat in the car. She held the steering wheel for a long time before starting the car. The phone in front of the central control rang. She looked at it and saw that it was Yi Mulin. She snorted softly. Didn't you not pick up my call? Although she was angry, she still picked up. Hello. Her voice was weak. Yi Mulin's voice was low. Where did you go? I called home, but no one answered. Bai Shirley felt a little wronged and said softly, I'm hungry. I'm going out for dinner. There was a moment of silence on the other side. I'll come back early. He looked like he was going to hang up. Bai Shirley was still a little disappointed and quickly stopped him. What are you going to do for dinner tonight? Secretary Li will order lunch for me, he said briefly. She actually wanted to ask him if he wanted her to pack it for him. She could also go to see him and then go home together. But he had already hung up. What? She threw the phone angrily. So cold. Are you still a newlywed? You promised to cook for me. She really wanted to ask her former sisters to go out and have fun and relax. But when she thought of Lawyer Ye's unsmiling face, she gave up and obediently went to eat by herself. The food in that Western restaurant was very good, and she was very satisfied after eating. In the end, she remembered that he also liked Western food, so she asked the waiter if she could eat out. After getting the waiter's approval, she ordered a set meal and prepared to bring it to his office. In any case, regardless of whether he was happy or not, she had to be thick-skinned. If he was angry, she would coax him. He might not be the one coaxing her every time. After driving for more than 20 minutes, she arrived at his office. Just as she was about to get out of the car, she suddenly saw Yi Mulin's car start. She subconsciously turned her face away when they came face to face. Perhaps it was a woman's intuition, but she felt that something was wrong. He said he was eating lunch in the office. Why did he go out now? But soon, she saw a woman sitting in the passenger seat of his car. An old acquaintance, Lawyer AI Wei. Chapter 3349. Yi Mulin's car stopped in front of a high-class restaurant. Then, he and AI Wei got out of the car and walked inside. Bai Shuili sat in the car and quietly watched them walk in together. When they entered the restaurant, AI Wei seemed to turn and her body fell towards Yi Mulin. Yi Mulin held her and walked in together. Riceworm looked at them and blinked gently. Her eyes were a little sore. She didn't know what was wrong with her. Her heart was blocked, and she felt very uncomfortable. After a long time, she reached out and gently wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes. She felt like a fool. She believed him when he said that he was eating in the office and brought him a lunchbox. But he didn't need it. He was having a candlelit dinner with his ex-girlfriend. She reached for her phone and called Yi Mulin's number. It rang 4 or 5 times before it was picked up. It was his cold voice. What's wrong? Bai Shuili held her breath. I've eaten. Do you want me to send you something? He seemed to think for a moment and then said calmly, No need. I'm a little busy. Are you still in the office? When Bai Shuili asked this, she could almost hear the sound of her heart beating. Yi Mulin frowned. Yes, I have something important to talk to someone about. She took a deep breath. Then when are you going back? In the restaurant. Yi Mulin looked at AI Wei's feet. He might have to take her to the hospital, so he thought for a moment and said, Around 10. You should sleep first. Outside the restaurant, Bai Shuili blinked gently and blinked away the tears in her eyes. She said in a very light tone, 10. There are still 3 hours. That's enough for you, an AI Wei, to have a meal and then go to the hotel. With that, she hung up the phone and threw the beautifully packaged lunchbox into the trash can next to the car. When she slid up the window, Yi Mulin's eyes met hers. She looked at him and AI Wei quietly for about 5 seconds. Soon, she closed the window and started the car. Yi Mulin quickly picked up his phone and said to AI Wei, Tell Mr. Robinson that I'm leaving first. He walked very fast. AI Wei stood up and stopped him. Yi Mulin. He turned his head. Whatever it is, we'll talk about it tomorrow. AI Wei's expression was very complicated. You weren't like this before. We clearly have an appointment to talk about business. Why would you give up such an important work for a little girl's mood? Knight, this is not your style. She is my wife. Yi Mulin said coldly and chased after her. AI Wei narrowed her eyes. Actually, when she was in the car, she saw Bai Shuili following behind the car. So, she twisted her ankle on purpose, and Bai Shuili probably misunderstood. She picked up the wine cup and gently swirled it. She smiled bitterly. Such an ignorant little girl. But Yi treats her like a treasure. She remembered that there were many superficial girls like Bai Shuili in school. They were always chasing after him, but he didn't look at any of them and just got together with her. So, she had always thought that he admired and liked women like her, but she didn't expect that his liking was so superficial. Chapter 3350. AI Wei put on a smile. You would get tired of such an ignorant girl. He would get back on the right track. His career needed a woman who could help him, not a woman who only knew how to have fun all day. AI Wei sat there quietly. When Yi Mulin walked out quickly, Bai Shiwili was already gone. He stood there for about 2 seconds, got in the car, and chased after her. But he lost her. He drove to the intersection, but couldn't find her car. He started to call her phone. Her phone was turned off. The cold voice of the mobile customer service said over and over again, "Sorry, the number you have dialed is turned off." Yi Mulin threw the phone away, drove around, and then drove back to the apartment. She didn't come back. He called her phone again, but it was still turned off. Yi Mulin sat on the bed, wiped his face, and went outside to look for her. It was getting late, but there was no news about her. He called Mubai. Mubai couldn't stand it anymore. "Brother, why did you lose her again? She didn't call me this time." Yi Mulin didn't answer Yi Mubai's question. He just continued to look for her. He looked for her in the nightclubs that she liked to go to one by one. In those places of luxury, there were many beautiful women with misty eyes, but none of them were his rice worms. Yi Mulin was a little anxious. He stood on the road and smoked after coming out of a nightclub. After smoking, he continued to look for her. He was a little disappointed and helpless that she might be in the nightclub. But no matter what, he had to find her. He saw her throw away the lunch at the entrance of the restaurant. She must have gone to the office and happened to see him and AI Wei coming out. AI Wei didn't drive, so she got in his car. That was all. Yi Mulin opened the door and got in the car. Then his phone rang. It was a very strange number. He narrowed his eyes, but still picked it up. "This is Yi Mulin." The voice on the other side was very gentle. "Lawyer Yi, my name is Gu Changfeng." "Gu Changfeng." Yi Mulin narrowed his eyes. Gu Changfeng's voice continued. "Shueli drank too much and caused trouble. She is now in the police station. She called me." Yi Mulin clenched his fingers. It was normal for her to be in a nightclub, and it was normal for her to cause trouble. However, she had called an old friend's number. This person had only been with her for 2 to 3 months, and she had been separated from this person for almost 6 years. She still remembered Gu Changfeng's number. Yi Mulin had no idea how bad his expression had turned. He lit a cigarette to calm himself down before asking, "Which police station?" "I'll be there in a minute." "In XX Bureau." Gu Changfeng's voice was very pleasant and made people feel warm when they heard it. It was a completely different style from Yi Mulin. Yi Mulin took a long drag on his cigarette and started the car with one hand. He went there as fast as he could. He stood at the door and saw the legendary Gu Changfeng. He looked similar to Mu Bai, but he was younger than Mu Bai and had a cleaner temperament. Because Mu Bai was in the entertainment industry, no matter how clean he would still be tainted with a bit of an aura. However, Gu Changfeng was different. He was so clean that he did not seem like the type that Bai Shiwili would like because he was too clean and perfect. Chapter 33:51. Yi Mulin did not disturb anyone. He just stood at the door and watched quietly. Bai Shiwili was drunk. She smashed the entire nightclub and caused the owner to lose millions. She was also drunk driving. Luckily, she was stopped by the police after driving for dozens of meters. Later, she was brought here in a daze. She told them Gu Changfeng's phone number in a daze. In fact, she could have told her husband's number, but she did not want to, because she did not want him anymore. He told her that he would cook for her, but he did not do it. He told her that he was working overtime. In fact, he brought another woman to eat Western food. He was obviously having sex with her. She was so stupid. She believed him when he said that AI Wei was in the past. He bought a tortoise at home, and she treated it like a treasure. He must be laughing at her behind her back. Yes, he often said that she was shallow, called her a worm, and said that she was stupid. How could he like her? She actually believed that he liked her and even lived with him outside. She was hopelessly stupid. She drank a lot. She knew that she had done a lot of ridiculous things. She was willful, but she was willful in the past. She did not want to be obedient. No one would like her, even if she was obedient. Gu Changfeng, Gu Changfeng. She remembered this name. She told him this number. He came and was still as good looking as before. She hugged him and cried for a long time. She said that she had broken up with her boyfriend. She asked him in a silly way if she still wanted him. If he was willing, she wouldn't mind having sex with him once. Gu Changfeng stood there and let the drunk cat hug him. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. But more than that, he felt a little helpless. He liked her. That year, when they were both teenagers, she ran to him and said that she liked him. She asked him if he wanted to be with her. Gu Changfeng had long heard that there was a stamp collector in her school. She would not be interested in him for more than a week. But Bai Shiuli was very beautiful at that time. He agreed. He said that they would be together for at least a month. That was the condition. He thought that 1 month was enough for her to like him a little. That period of time was wonderful for Gu Changfeng. He thought that she was also very happy. But after 1 month, she proposed to break up with him. She did not bring too much for a day. That day, Gu Changfeng realized that in this world, it was not because you were handsome, a straight-A student, or a good family background that all the girls would follow you wholeheartedly. Maybe she just wanted to try something new. During the time they were together, she had only let him kiss her face once. She had said that it was a special treatment and that it was a gift from the heavens. The especially funny and cute Bai Shiuli. When she turned around to leave, there was no hesitation or reluctance. It was only later that he heard that she liked Yimu Bai from the Yi clan. All the boys she had pursued looked a little like Yimu Bai. He purposely went to take a look at that boy. He looked to be 5 or 6 years older than them and had a very noble air about him. Of course, Yimu Bai had an older brother who looked more noble, but his temperament was very cold. On the day he went, Bai Shiuli was pestering Yimu Bai, while Yi Mulin was sitting on a chair with a book in his hand. He looked at the two little ones quietly and disdainfully, but the way he looked at Bai Shiuli was filled with an unconcealable fanaticism. That year, Gu Changfeng knew that Bai Shiuli liked Yimu Bai, but Yi Mulin liked Bai Shiuli. However, after taking a closer look, he found that his appearance was actually more like Yi Mulin's. This was probably something that Bai Shiuli herself did not realize. He quietly left her world for many years. Chapter 33:52. Gu Changfeng looked at Yi Mulin, who was standing by the door. This was the second time he had seen Yi Mulin, and the first time Yi Mulin had seen him. The two men looked at each other in silence. After a long while, Yi Mulin said, "How is she?" Gu Changfeng stared at him and stood up slowly. "Lawyer Yi, right? My name is Gu Changfeng." He stretched out his hand. Yi Mulin walked over and shook hands with Gu Changfeng. Two intelligent men with the same thoughts could naturally feel the magnetic field coming from each other. Yi Mulin had noticed that this man's gaze towards Bai Shiuli was filled with love. Gu Changfeng still liked Bai Shiuli, his wife. This made Yi Mulin very uncomfortable. He bent down and wanted to hug the drunk woman, but she pushed him away and said, "No, I don't want you to hug me." Yi Mulin stared at her. She was completely drunk. She squinted at him. "I don't want you to hug me." She opened her eyes and looked at Gu Changfeng. "Come and hug me. I don't want to go home and see Yi Mulin." Gu Changfeng stood there and smiled bitterly. He looked at Yi Mulin. Take good care of her. No matter how much he missed her, she had already become someone else's wife. Gu Changfeng had once thought that she would marry Yimu Bai. After all, everyone knew that she liked Yimu Bai so much. But in the end, she married Yi Mulin. Yi Mulin loved her. Gu Changfeng finished his words and walked out. Bai Shiuli was originally drunk and was lying there like a puddle of mud. But now she was full of energy again. She ran over and hugged Gu Changfeng with all her strength. She didn't know where she got it from. "Gu Changfeng, don't go." She hugged him from behind and put her face on his back. "Let's start over, okay? This time, I will love you. I will fall in love with you." Gu Changfeng did not move. He restrained himself and whispered after a long time, "Lawyer Yi, pull her away. She's just drunk." "I don't want to." She threw a tantrum and hugged Gu Changfeng tightly. "He has someone else. I don't want him anymore. I don't want him anymore." As she spoke, her tears came out and seeped into Gu Changfeng's shirt, making it wet and warm. He knew he couldn't go on like this. After all, her husband was here. Gu Changfeng was a little regretful now. Maybe he should not have asked Yi Mulin to come. Maybe he should have accompanied her. He gently broke away from her, not even daring to look at her, and walked quickly away. He was afraid that if he didn't leave now, he wouldn't be able to bear to leave. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control himself and would want to take her back. As soon as he left, Baishuali lost her balance and almost fell. A sturdy arm hooked around her waist and lifted her up forcefully, walking outside. If he showed up, he could certainly take her away. In fact, when Gu Changfeng said his name, this small temple knew that they had caught the wrong person. She was the daughter of the Bai family and the daughter-in-law of the Yi family. They could not afford to offend her. Therefore, when Yi Mulin wanted to bring people along, the leader didn't dare to say a word. Baishuali was hugged by him. His face was ashen. She was not much better. Although she was drunk, she could still recognize him. She pounded on his shoulder and said hoarsely, "I don't want to go back with you, Yi Mulin, you bastard." Yi Mulin's face looked even worse. He squinted at the woman on his shoulder. "You don't want to live, do you?" Chapter 33:53. No matter how hard she struggled, she was still carried into the car and thrown into the back seat. His actions were very rough. When he was driving, he slowly fastened the seatbelt and looked at the situation behind him from the rearview mirror. She was still lying there as before. She seemed to be drunk and asleep at the same time. His heart was as wet as water. He started the car with a cold face. Half an hour later, the car stopped outside the apartment. Yi Mulin still carried her upstairs rudely. It was quiet in the apartment and the lights were off. He turned on the light, which woke her up. She opened her eyes and looked around for a while. Then she cried, "I don't want to come back. I want to go out." The last word was dragged out and disappeared because of discomfort. She closed her eyes and her body trembled. After a while, her teeth chattered. "Let me go." He looked at her and knew that she was afraid of the cold after drinking too much, so his face became colder. He carried her to the bathroom and threw her in the corner. He went to fill a tub with hot water and threw her in with her clothes. Baishuali almost drowned. She instinctively clung to the edge of the tub, like a puppy falling into the water. But soon she felt that the water was very comfortable, so she didn't want to move. She closed her eyes and rested her face there. She was really tired after a night of fooling around. She lay there for a long time without making sound. Yi Mulin stood there with cold eyes. It happened because of her misunderstanding, but the result made him want to crush her. She called Gu Changfeng. After so many years, she still remembered that man's phone number. Did she really not like him? Or did she like warm men like Gu Changfeng and Mu Bai? Yi Mulin touched his pocket and wanted to smoke a cigarette. But when he was about to put it on his lips, he suddenly took it down and stared at her for a long time. He carried her up, took a towel, and wiped her roughly. Then he walked into the master bedroom and threw her on the big bed. She woke up immediately and looked at him with big eyes. Yi Mulin looked at her and said lightly, "Do you still want to go? Do you still want to find Gu Changfeng?" She looked at him for a long time. It seemed that she was sober. She lowered her head slowly and leaned against the headboard without making a sound. Yi Mulin rubbed his aching forehead and stared at the heartless little girl. He sneered, "Why aren't you saying anything?" She moved away again, as though afraid he would catch her, as though afraid he would hit her. There was a sharp pain in his heart. Baishuali lowered her eyes and said softly, "I don't want you anymore, okay?" She raised her eyes and looked at him. Her gaze was a little confused, but it became firm after a while. "Yi Mulin, I don't want you anymore." He looked at her quietly. "You drank too much." As he spoke, he wanted to go out for a smoke. Otherwise, he would want to strangle her to death. However, Baishuali said softly behind him, "Let's get a divorce. I don't care if you're going to bring me to my father or anything else. I'm going to get a divorce. Even if I starve to death, I won't watch my husband eat with another woman while I deliver food to him like a fool. Yi Mulin, how could I be so stupid? How could a man like you like someone like me?" She wiped away her tears. "I was too naive." Chapter 33:54. Baishuali looked at him. Her gaze was piercing and her expression was a little mischievous. "Yi Mulin, do you know what other people call me?" His face darkened. Baishuali stretched her fair legs and smiled. "The little princess of the nightclub. I'm not that easy to get drunk." She said it with a smile, but only she knew that her heart was bleeding. Yi Mulin looked at her without much expression on his face. So we divorce? She said indifferently, I don't have to be with you, and you don't have to be with me. He put out the cigarette and said, By Shiweli, how do you know? He stared at her little face and said, You're drunk, you're messing around, and you called Gu Changfeng here just to tell me that there are a lot of men behind you, waiting to take over at any time, right? Yes. She smiled and said, At least he is younger and more loyal than you. He sneered, Did you see me sleeping with her? Bai Shuili looked at him and sneered. Yi Mulin, are you playing word games with me? You know that she likes you. Why did you eat with her and help her? You said that you would come back at 10 o'clock. Do you need 10 o'clock to talk about business? Yi Mulin didn't explain, because if he said that he was going to send AI Wei to the hospital, she would probably make more trouble. He just frowned and said, Because of this, you want to see Gu Changfeng? Yes. She sneered and said, Lawyer Yi, you came too early, or you would have seen me sleeping with him. She kept saying that, which made him very depressed. He said coldly, By Shiweli, you'd better shut up, or I'm afraid I'll strangle you. She looked down and said, I have nothing to say even if you want me to. Very well. He looked at her coldly. What about now? You're going to see Gu Changfeng after the divorce? What is Mubai? She didn't say anything, just held her knees and lowered her head. At that moment, she looked very fragile, as if everything that had happened just now was just her disguise. I will leave tomorrow morning, she said softly. Yi Mulin, I will fulfill your wish. As she spoke, she lifted the bed and walked toward the door where Xiaobai was. She picked it up and looked at it, then put it back. You take care of this little turtle. Yi Mulin's heart hardened. By Shiweli, you can leave as you wish. But this turtle, I don't want it either. She felt a sharp pain in her heart. He continued to look at her. There's a limit to being willful. It doesn't matter even if you spend hundreds of millions of yuan on drinking and driving drunk. But you went to Gu Changfeng. By Shiweli, do you think that no matter what you do, I will spoil and coax you? She looked up at him. Then throw it away. It's up to you. She walked back to the big bed, buried herself in the quilt, and said softly, I'm going to sleep. Yi Mulin squinted at her for a while, then walked straight out. The door slammed loudly. Little White shrunk its head into the shell for a while, then carefully popped out again. Its two bean-like eyes were a little confused. Yi Mulin walked out and smoked a cigarette helplessly. Only then did he feel that he was very hungry. He walked to the kitchen, took out his mobile phone, and called AI Wei. He simply asked if there was anything wrong with her foot. Chapter 33:55. Yi Mulin cooked a bowl of noodles for himself, but when he sat down to eat, he lit a cigarette. The noodles were cold, and he didn't touch it. He leaned against the back of the chair and smoked quietly. All he could see was the scene of her hugging Gu Changfeng. She cried and threw a tantrum for Gu Changfeng. Yi Mulin's eyes were full of coldness. He sat there until late at night, the cigarette butts piled up in front of him. He blinked his sore eyes and looked at the cold noodles in front of him. He didn't want to eat it, so he threw it directly into the dustbin. He didn't go back to his room to sleep. Instead, he went to the study and read documents the whole night. When it was almost dawn, he walked back to the bedroom. Bai Shuili was lying quietly and seemed to be sleeping soundly. He stood there and looked at her. He didn't know what to do with her. Xiaobai was crawling in the box, making small sounds. He looked sideways and his eyes were cold. Xiaobai immediately shrank its head and didn't dare to come out again. Yi Mulin narrowed his eyes and took Xiaobai out to look at it carefully. In the end, he snorted, If you don't listen to me, I'll stew you. Xiaobai kept its head down. Yi Mulin put it back. He walked into the bathroom in the master bedroom to take a shower. After taking a quick shower, he took out his suitcase and put a few simple clothes in it. When he walked out, he stopped in his tracks. He was going on a business trip. It was decided at the last minute yesterday. He was going with AI Wei and another lawyer. Secretary Li was going too. If it had been before, he would have told her. But now there was no need to say it. One was Ren, and the other was very arrogant. He didn't want to spoil her like this all the time, especially when she hugged another man so often, which made him very unhappy. He didn't explain about AI Wei because there was no need. It was in public, so what? Instead, he was still angry with her. Yi Mulin went on a business trip and didn't leave a word. In fact, Bai Shuli was awake. She heard him taking a shower and dragging his suitcase out. She knew that he was going to leave. Was he going on a business trip? Would he be with AI Wei? She closed her eyes and gently moved her fingers on the pillow. She thought to herself that they were indeed not suitable for each other. She was so angry and drunk that she wanted to look for Gu Changfeng, but he was so angry that he did not tell her anything even when he went on a business trip. Last night she said she was moving away, and he said whatever. Perhaps this was his attitude. Bai Shueli, what's there to cry about? You chose your own path. Either you don't say anything when you see it, or you leave freely. She thought angrily, but when she heard him close the door, she could not help crying. She told herself not to cry. She told herself that it wasn't a big deal and that she didn't like him that much. Even if they broke up, even if they divorced, it wasn't a big deal. He didn't like her, but there were many people who liked her and were willing to spoil her. She lay there quietly, wanting to get up, but she stayed on the bed for a long time. She didn't know what she was missing. He was clearly a scumbag. Why was she still thinking about him? At 9 o'clock, the cleaning Annie came over. She didn't know what happened between the young couple. She walked to the door and asked politely, "Miss Bai, what would you like to eat today?" Chapter 33:56. The Annie didn't think too much about it and nodded. "All right, I'll be gentle so that I won't disturb your sleep." Bai Shuli shook her head. "No need, I'll be out in a while." The Annie smiled. "You woke up so early in the morning. I thought you'd like to sleep more." Bai Shuli's face was a little pale. Actually, she used to like to sleep in, but she couldn't sleep anymore. She got up immediately to brush her teeth and wash her face before thinking about packing. However, she was standing in this house where she had only stayed for 2 days. Everything here was bought by Yi Mulin, and she couldn't even bring a single piece of clothing with her. No, she only had Xiao Bai. Yi Mulin said that he didn't want Xiao Bai and wanted to throw him away, so she took him with her. She walked to the door and picked up Xiao Bai. She stared at him for a long time and said softly, "Daddy doesn't want you. Follow Mummy, and Mummy will find you a better stepfather." She carried a small bag and left with Xiao Bai in her hand. She didn't take anything with her. His bank card and the jewelry he had bought for her were all left behind. She only took her own things and Xiao Bai. She was light and only carried a little tortoise. Naturally, the Annie wouldn't suspect anything and smiled. "Let's go. Be careful outside. The cars outside don't have eyes these days." Bai Shuili smiled. "Got it, Andy." The auntie quite liked her. She looked like a very obedient and innocent girl. She had been working here for 2 years, and lawyer Yi had never brought a girl back. The auntie watched her leave with a smile before continuing to work. About 10 minutes later, the landline at home rang. It was Yi Mulin. He was at the airport. "Is Shweli still sleeping?" he asked softly. The auntie was straightforward. "Miss Bai's already left." Yi Mulin's brows twitched, and he asked immediately, "Did she bring any luggage?" No, she just carried a small bag." The auntie smiled. "And a little tortoise. She probably want to set it free." Yi Mulin gripped the phone tightly and closed his eyes. "Got it. She didn't set it free. She ran away from home. Or rather, she left his world." Just as the auntie was about to hang up, Yi Mulin asked in a low, hoarse voice, "Go to the bedroom and see if she left anything by the bedside." The auntie took the cordless phone and walked over. After a while, she said, "There's a shiny ring, a necklace, and a bank card on the bedside table. It's Miss Bai's." At first, it was nothing, but now, the auntie felt uneasy. These should have been bought by Sir for Miss Bai. If Miss Bai kept them, that would mean she doesn't know what to say for a while. After a long time, she asks hesitantly, "Mr. Yi, do you want to come back to look for it?" "No need. She'll come back when she's done." Yi Mulin hung up the phone. The auntie was very anxious. What should she do? Mr. Yi didn't take Miss Bai seriously. Little girls needed to be coaxed. On the other side, Yi Mulin held his phone and looked down. His fingers moved slightly, as if he was about to make a call. But in the end, he put his phone into his pocket and walked straight to the private plane. AI Wei and Secretary Li walked behind him. AI Wei said lightly, "Does lawyer Yi often quarrel with his wife?" Chapter 3357. Secretary Lee didn't say anything, but she thought to herself, "You haven't stopped since you came back." An ex-girlfriend was indeed the most lethal weapon in the world. In the private plane, Yi Mulin turned on his laptop and started to work after sitting down. Secretary Lee poured him a cup of coffee. She wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. Yi Mulin looked at the cup of coffee and said in a low voice, "If you're not sure if you can say it, then don't say it." Secretary Lee was a very straightforward girl, and she liked by Xiuli very much, so she said straightforwardly, "Any girl would be angry. Lawyer Yi, your requirements are too harsh." Yi Mulin looked at her with a very serious expression. Secretary Lee whispered, "Only the governor is allowed to set fire, but the people are not allowed to light the lamp." Yi Mulin said coldly, "You don't have to say it. I won't say it if you don't want to." Secretary Lee took the documents and sat down. At this time, AI Wei just came out of the bathroom. Hearing this, the atmosphere was a little strange, but she didn't care. She sat next to Yi Mulin and said softly, "If I caused a misunderstanding between you and Miss Bai, I can explain it." Yi Mulin's eyes fell on the screen, and his voice was very indifferent. "It has nothing to do with you. He and Bai Shuli were not like this because of AI Wei. It had never been because of him. If it was only about AI Wei, he would coax her. But he did it for Gu Changfeng." After Yi Mulin finished speaking, AI Wei felt a little uncomfortable. She just smiled and said nothing more. Yi Mulin continued to deal with his work and didn't say anything. He discussed everything with AI Wei through email. AI Wei became a little restless under her calm appearance. She thought that Yi Mulin didn't go back to find Bai Shueli, so she was confident that they might have separated. Maybe Yi Mulin couldn't stand that girl's willfulness anymore, and she would have chance. But he was still cold to her, so she was not sure. Perhaps on this trip to Hong Kong, she could take their relationship a step further. Sometimes this kind of thing had nothing to do with the law, but with morality. AI Wei's thoughts drifted away. Yi Mulin talked with her for a long time, but she was not in the right state, so he hung up. He didn't look good. He had never liked women who could not distinguish between private and private matters. The private plane flew to Hong Kong in 2 hours, and there was an urgent meeting with the lawyers of the foreign company. The Chinese side was represented by Yi Mulin and his assistant lawyer, while AI Wei represented the foreign company. This contract was very large, and it would take a few months to negotiate. There were too many details involved. Under Yi Mulin's dominance, the foreign representatives did not gain the slightest advantage. When the meeting ended, AI Wei's expression was a little ugly, but she still forced a smile. She sent off the company representative and walked towards Yi Mulin. "How is it? Do you want to go out for a meal? I heard Hong Kong has a lot of good food." Yi Mulin tidied up his documents and said calmly, "I'm not going. You can ask Secretary Lee to come along." AI Wei's expression was somewhat dejected as she said indifferently, "All right then." Secretary Lee came over and whispered, "I have a friend in Hong Kong. I have an appointment with him later." She didn't want to eat with such a scheming woman. It would affect her digestion. Yi Mulin looked at Secretary Lee thoughtfully and did not say anything. He had never cared too much about these things. When he walked out, the streets were bustling. It was the same as he remembered. Chapter 3358. Standing on the streets of Hong Kong, he would think that if he and Bai Shueli had not fallen out, he could have brought her here. After the meeting, he could have taken her to eat delicious food. Maybe she would have taken him because she was the best when it came to food. After the meal, he would go back to work and she would make a scene with him and pester him. Yi Mulin stood quietly on the street, took out a cigarette, and took a puff. Then he walked towards the hotel opposite. He was not in the mood to do anything else. He only had work. He worked in a hotel suite until 11 o'clock. Then he remembered that he had not eaten. He sat on the office chair and spaced out for a while. He was thinking about where Bai Shueli was. Did she eat? She was with Xiao Bai and would not go back. Where was she now? Was she with Gu Changfeng? Yi Mulin's eyes were cold. He was in a daze, but he could not control his thoughts. Last night, she told him about the divorce. She hugged Gu Changfeng in front of him. She said so much, and he really wanted to let it go. Maybe they were not suitable for each other. If she was unhappy, it would be hard for him. But even if they were apart, he did not seem to be happy. He sat and put out the cigarette in annoyance. But after a while, he lit another one and called room service to order food. While waiting for the food, he took a shower. He did not plan to go out, so he only wore a bathrobe. The doorbell rang. He thought it was the waiter, so he opened the door and went out. It was AI Wei outside. AI Wei was dressed very sexily. She was wearing a silk nightgown with spaghetti straps. She did not seem to be wearing any underwear. Her hands were gently covering her breasts. She looked very seductive. Besides, Yi Mulin was very tall. He only needed to look down, and he could see her body. AI Wei dressed like this in the middle of the night. It was obvious what she was thinking. Mulin, I brought some documents here. Shall we work overtime together? She waved the files in her hands. Yi Mulin's gaze swept over her, and then he said faintly, I'm ready to rest. AI Wei looked disappointed and loosened her fingers. Honestly, his figure was great, not any worse than his wife's. However, AI Wei neglected one point. Yi Mulin was not a perverted demon. He had been abstinent for so many years, but it was not like there were no beauties who threw themselves at him. If he wanted a woman, he only needed to spend some money. There was no need for him to find a business partner to be ambiguous. Yi Mulin's eyes turned cold. AI Wei, I'm a married man. Next time you come to see me, wear more clothes. I don't want to be in a gossip magazine. With that, he took a step back and closed the door. AI Wei stood awkwardly at the door. She could not believe that she had been rejected. She knew that it was very tempting for her to dress like this. Any man would not be able to resist it. Not to mention that Yi Mulin was in a bad mood and needed a woman to comfort him. At this moment, the male waiter came to deliver the food. When he saw AI Wei standing at the door, although he was well-trained, he couldn't resist the natural hormones of a man. His eyes stared straight at her. AI Wei felt insulted and immediately covered her chest. She stormed to her room and slammed the door. The waiter knocked on Yi Mulin's door. After a while, Yi Mulin opened the door and asked him to push the food cart in. The food was very sumptuous and tasty. However, Yi Mulin put down his chopsticks after eating a few mouthfuls. He looked up at the night sky of Hong Kong. He missed that shallow and useless worm. He was a man of his word. He really wanted to go back to B-City, but he couldn't let go of this case. He picked up his phone and flipped through the call log. Chapter 33:59. Yi Mulin's fingers flipped through the screen and finally stopped at a certain grid. It was marked with the words rice worm. Her phone. What was she doing now? It was so late at night. Where would she go if not back? She wouldn't go back to the Bai family, nor would she go back to the mansion. Where would she go? She had returned the car dam. Did she have money to use? Yi Mulin wasn't a worrywart, but he was worried sick about by Xueli. But he couldn't do anything. He hesitated and thought for a long time, but he still dialed that number. The phone rang for a long time, but no one picked up. He wasn't a pestering person, but he still dialed again and again. After dialing for about 10 minutes, the phone finally connected. It was her voice. I think I made myself clear. Yi Mulin, if you call me again, I'll look down on you. She hung up after saying that. He could tell that the environment she was in was messy, like a bar or a nightclub. Yi Mulin frowned, leaning there for a long time before dialing Mubai's number again. At this time, Yi Mubai was already asleep. After retiring from the entertainment industry, his daily routine had become very relaxed. The voice on the phone was still a bit muffled. Brother. Yi Mubai's voice was very cold. Bai Xueli and I are going to divorce. Before that, I don't want to be cuckolded. Yi Mubai sat up and touched his forehead. So, help me look after her these few days. Go find her now. No matter what method you use to keep her, wait for me to come back from Hong Kong. Yi Mulin's voice was emotionless. Yi Mubai was also stunned for a long time before he suddenly chuckled. Brother, isn't it good for her to go out and fool around? If she unfortunately has a wild man outside, I think you won't be able to tolerate it. Divorce is good. Yi Mulin gritted his teeth. I don't want to be cuckolded in marriage. Yi Mubai chuckled. I'm not the one being cuckolded. Why should I be anxious? He paused for a moment. Brother, you don't trust her at all. In your heart, she's not only shallow, but also has no bottom line, right? You actually look down on her from the bottom of your heart, thinking that she can sleep with anyone at any time. Actually, let me tell you, but she really won't. Even when I took the initiative to pull her into bed, she refused at the very last moment. He paused for a moment, then continued. Actually, you don't know her at all, and you don't trust her. It's good that you're divorced like this. It's also quite painful for me to see her. Yi Mulin narrowed his eyes. You've seen her? Yes, we had a drink together in the evening. Gu Changfeng was there too. Oh yes, you might have already met him. I don't need to describe Gu Changfeng to you, right? He is an artistic young man who has won countless international awards. He is much younger than us 2 pieces of cured meat. He is also gentle and good at taking care of people. If I were Shirley, I would also choose him. After all, Gu Changfeng doesn't have any messy ex-girlfriends. Yi Mubai said impolitely, then hung up and turned off his phone. On the other side, Yi Mulin almost went crazy. He held the phone in his hand and almost wanted to smash it. In fact, Yi Mubai was right. He looked down on by Xueli. He always thought that nothing would happen to him in AI way, but he had never been trusted by anyone. Chapter 3360. It was not until dawn that Yi Mulin called by Xueli again. He wanted to tell her to wait for him to come back. They needed to have a good talk. But this time, she didn't give him a chance to speak. She turned off her phone. Yi Mulin narrowed his eyes. His expression was cold. Therefore, on this day, he did not look too good during the meeting, and his expression was sharper than usual. When Secretary Li saw his boss's expression, he was very worried for AI Wei. However, she was also worried about her boss. The photo of him wearing a bathrobe and standing at the door of the hotel room with AI Wei was on the headlines again. AI Wei was dressed very sexily. Secretary Li didn't like Lawyer Yi. He didn't have a wife to warm his bed. A good man shouldn't let other women take advantage of him. Lawyer Yi indeed didn't give AI Wei a chance, but this kind of incomplete rejection was a disguised encouragement, especially since you have a wife, and you even created an opportunity for your wife and ex-girlfriend to get to know each other. That was your fault. At the end of the day's meeting, everyone was cursed to death. Even AI Wei's face was pale, while Yi Mulin's face looked like it was covered with a layer of ice. In the middle of the meeting, AI Wei didn't go out for a breath of fresh air. Instead, she looked at Yi Mulin. Do you mind what happened last night? She looked at him. Yi, why do you care about a willful little girl who ran away from home? Yi Mulin looked at AI Wei. His eyes were like ice. Did you ask someone to take the photo? No. AI Wei denied. I'm not that low class. I like to fly around the world in my pajamas. Yi Mulin smiled faintly. That's good. But AI Wei, let me tell you, you can't be too greedy. Don't forget that you are the lawyer of this company. The closer you are to me, the more trouble you will get. If you don't have feelings for me, don't lose your career. His warning made AI Wei's face pale. She almost forgot about this. Then, she almost choked and asked, You asked someone to take the photo on purpose. You knew it but didn't stop it? He didn't answer this question. He wouldn't tell AI Wei that he just wanted a woman to see some news about him when she was wandering outside. He didn't mind appearing with AI Wei again and making her jealous. If she really loved him, she would believe his last explanation and wait for him to return to B City. Yi Mulin stayed in Hong Kong for 3 days. Originally, he needed 5 days, but AI Wei was called back to San Francisco to report. In fact, it was also because of her relationship with Yi Mulin that the company no longer trusted her. Before she left, she said to Yi Mulin, I never thought you were a man who would use underhanded means to deal with women. Yi Mulin just looked at her and said indifferently, Lawyer AI, I don't want to find an opponent who knows my weakness. AI Wei's heart trembled. Is she your weakness? She repeated, You said she's your weakness? She took a step back and suddenly smiled. I understand. She left and headed for the airport. Chapter 3361. Yi Mulin looked at Secretary Li. Is that so? Secretary Li couldn't help looking at Yi Mulin as if he was an idiot. Lawyer Yi, actually, I feel that after you and Mrs. Yi get married, You can take the wife's surname. Yulin squinted and stared at her. Secretary Lee made a face and winked. That's exactly what I mean. Surname by means idiot. Yulin was a man with a high IQ. How could he not understand it? He glared at her and said, "Shut up. If you say another word, I'll leave you in Hong Kong." Secretary Lee ran behind him and didn't dare to speak loudly. She only whispered, "Aren't you worried about how to get your wife back?" Yulin opened the car door with a cold face. Secretary Lee sat in the car and squeezed out a smile. "Lawyer Yi, I know you are soft-hearted, but you can actually give in to Mrs. Yi." Yulin never opened his heart, but he was really depressed at this moment. So he patted his trousers and asked, "Didn't I give in to her enough? She got drunk and found an ex-boyfriend to piss me off." Secretary Lee opened her eyes wide. She actually felt that Lawyer Yi was a little cute. She swallowed and asked in a low voice, "Isn't her ex-boyfriend Lawyer Ye's brother, the national husband?" Yulin said coldly, "If it was Mu Bai, do you think I would be so angry?" How could Secretary Lee answer? Secretary Lee could only laugh. Yes, they're a family. She was annoyed, but she was also thinking happily about how many exes Mrs. Yi had. While she was thinking, Yulin's voice came, "She has many boyfriends, more than I have seen female lawyers." What a sour word. Secretary Lee couldn't help laughing, but then she covered it immediately. Yulin glared at her and said nothing. "Lawyer Yi, why don't you say anything?" Secretary Lee asked carefully. She really wanted to dig something out. Yulin turned his head to look out of the window. After a long silence, he said, "She actually only had one serious ex-boyfriend, Gu Changfeng." Speaking of this, he was not sure if Bai Shuili would come back to him. Just like what Mu Bai had said, Gu Changfeng was young, good-looking, rich, and could fly around the world, unlike him who was a heartless lawyer. His hands were stained with the blood of his clients. That was what Bai Shuili had said. He sighed softly. It was normal for her to like someone else. In the evening, he returned to his usual apartment. Even though he knew that she wasn't there, he still held his breath when he opened the door. He was still hoping that she would run out of the bedroom barefooted and hug him, saying to him, "Why did you come back so late? Xiao Bai and I are starving." However, when the door opened, the room was filled with darkness and silence. At that moment, he felt a sense of helplessness. He put the luggage down, looked around the room, and went into the master bedroom. The place where Little White was placed was already empty. He touched it lightly with his finger and looked at the head of the bed. There were a few things placed there. He walked over and stood there, looking down at them. After a long time, he picked them up and touched them one by one. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.